Chapter 4, Carnival, Part 2. Spike gasped and pointed.
Look, it's Rarity!
He shoved a claw in his mouth when he realized how loud he had been.
Are my spines straight?
He whispered, fervently grooming the scales on his head with his claws. Rarity turned her head and noticed them. She trotted up to Twilight, eyeing Spike, and said,
"Oh, it's you. Hello again. And sorry for calling you a strange pet, by the way."
She inclined her head respectively to Spike.
"I made a bit of a faux pas."
She tittered gracefully.
"I was so flustered by the pink ruffian."
Twilight could hear Spike's breath coming in short, quick gasps. Still, the little fey dragon had the composure to say,
"A lady as gracious as you need not apologize."
He nearly fell off Twilight's back, bowing, but Twilight felt him starting to slide and caught him with her levitation. Rarity pretended not to notice Spike overbalance.
"How noble of you. So quick to forgive."
The compliment left Spike speechless.
"Well, ta-ta!"
As quickly as she had appeared, Rarity moved into the growing throng of ponies. Spike sighed as he watched Rarity leave, starting to flow off Twilight's back as his legs went weak. This time, she let him fall. She looked down at him while he stared up at the sky.
"She's so amazing."
"You do realize that she's a pony and you're, well..."
Twilight said, trailing off as she realized that her statement could be dream-crushing for the poor familiar.
"I'm what?"
Spike said, semi-alert. Twilight quickly picked him up and set him on her back.
"Nothing."
She caught a glimpse of Rarity moving around a pavilion, and she followed, curious.
"Where are you going?"
Spike asked.
"I want to know what she does next,"
Twilight said. She followed Rarity around the bend. Trailing after the purple flashes of the white unicorn's tail, she lurked in between the pavilions.
"If she accuses me of stalking her, I'm blaming you,"
Spike whispered.
"If she does that, blame away,"
Twilight hissed back at him.
"Now be quiet."
It wasn't long before they reached the edge of the carnival. Rarity trotted toward a line of unloaded carnival wagons on the edge of the field beside a wall of rutted dirt road. Twilight saw a few young, gaunt-looking zebras and ponies grazing on the tough, muddy grass beside the road. Hands and helpers, no doubt. She watched from the corner of an empty wooden booth while Rarity approached the group. She passed them a few bits. Twilight was out of earshot, but she could see their graceful expressions. Twilight murmured, starting to like Rarity a little more despite her earlier attempt at taking the bits from Twilight and her friends. She retreated back onto the main carnival grounds and headed for the stage at the center. Her friends were probably gathered there by now. Twilight arrived just in time to hear,
"Come one, come all, come and witness the amazing magic of the great and powerful Trixie!"
Over a small crowd, she saw a sparkling display of magic, and from a cloud of smoke in the middle of the stage, the unicorn from the poster appeared, complete with the same hat, robe, and smirk. Twilight maneuvered her way through the crowd to where she found her friends standing near the front. A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd around her.
"Watch as the great and powerful Trixie performs the most spectacular feats of magic ever witnessed by pony eyes,"
Trixie continued with grandiose flair.
"Betcha she's nothing compared to you, Twi. I already know I'm more amazing,"
Rainbow said in her ear when Twilight reached the group.
"No sign of Fluttershy?"
Twilight asked, rolling her eyes.
"Nothing yet,"
Rainbow answered.
"Stand prepared to be awed, for on this magical journey, the great and powerful Trixie will take you to faraway lands with her unheard-of teleportation abilities. If you do not have the fortitude for such an adventure, the great and powerful Trixie must warn you to leave while you still can, for this journey is not for the faint of heart."
Twilight's eyes widened at Trixie's claim. According to what her book said, teleportation magic was exceedingly difficult. While short-distance teleports could be performed with relative ease, long-range teleportation required anchored gateways. Trixie feigned surprise.
No one wishes to leave? Very well. To the Crystal City!
Trixie closed her eyes, her horn glowing brightly. A flare of white light forced Twilight to close her eyes. When the light faded, she stared in astonishment. Her friends, and the entire crowd stood on a polished crystal street. She looked around in confusion. All the normality of the carnival had vanished, replaced by exotic crystalline structures of various hues. In front of them, Trixie stood on a sapphire stage. Behind Trixie, a grand white crystal spire held up by 4 massive arches rose to a dizzying height. The space around them contained both a mystical quality and a sad, eerie emptiness. The frightened murmuring of the audience surrounded Twilight.
Have no fear, my little ponies, you are perfectly safe. The great and powerful Trixie will protect you,
Trixie assured.
Now certainly you are all wondering, why did you bring us here? And the great and powerful Trixie has the answer. She brought you here because she was once a crystal pony.
A collective gasp went through the audience, and Twilight found herself joining them. Crystal ponies existed at one point, but no one had either seen or heard of them for 1,000 years. It would be impossible for Trixie to be one.
Oh yes, we all know of the empire that claims connections to the Grand Crystal Empire, but the great and powerful Trixie assures you that they are but a candle in comparison to the roaring bonfire of the glory of the crystal ponies,
Trixie continued.
But our tale turns sour, for the crystal ponies were so jealous of the great and powerful Trixie that they banished her to faraway lands. Do you want to know what inspired such an insipid jealousy?
Trixie raised her hoof to her ear, waiting for an audience response. The spellbound crowd cried, "Yes!" Twilight hoofed the dirt beneath her hooves with unease. This whole thing, in any realm of magic she understood, should have been thoroughly impossible. The Crystal City was gone, and time travel was even more impossible than ungated mass teleportation.
Wait! Dirt?
She looked down and pulled back her hoof as Trixie continued her tale. Her hoof was pristine, the ground beneath it solid crystal. She set her hoof back down. The ground felt smooth once more.
Well then, witness as the great and powerful Trixie takes you to find an Ursa Major, so that she may do the deed that caused her banishment.
Before Twilight could fully process what Trixie had just said, the world around them changed again in a brilliant flash. Trixie stood above the crowd on a rocky outcropping, silhouetted against the night sky. A tree line loomed eerily around them. A distance away, a creature large as a house that looked like it had ripped its coat from the starry sky itself stood on the rocks. Its intimidating roar shook Twilight to her core, and the crowd screamed.
Have no fear,
Trixie cried.
It cannot hurt you with the great and powerful Trixie near. In order to make this demonstration as authentic as possible, though, she will have to call upon her assistant, Butterfly.
Between the Ursa and Trixie, a pony with a creamy yellow coat and a long pink mane and tail rippled into existence on the rocky outcropping that Trixie had made into her stage. Twilight stared at the Ursa. It waited unmoving, save for the shimmer of stars in its coat.
That's Fluttershy,
Rainbow hissed in her ear. Twilight flicked her attention back to the new pony on the stage. Cruel manacles held Fluttershy against a stone slab. She had no wings that Twilight could see. The Ursa loomed over her.
We have to help her!
Rainbow shouted as she launched forward with a powerful beat of her wings. Before she could close the distance, a ring of steel appeared, encircling and constricting her wings. She plummeted like a stone, her momentum carrying her face first into the rock beneath Trixie. Twilight thought she heard a cracking sound.
Rainbow!
She called with worry, her voice joined by Pinky and Applejack. Rainbow stirred.
I'm okay. Ow.
She grunted, and Twilight sighed with relief.
Do not interfere,
Trixie warned. She flicked her cape and strode forward to face the Ursa. The bear pulled back a massive paw, eliciting a whimper from Fluttershy. Twilight almost cast a spell to intervene, but Trixie addressed the creature.
Face the great and powerful Trixie, foul beast!
Trixie shouted. The Ursa turned its massive head to look at Trixie and began to lumber toward her. Trixie channeled a spell, her horn consumed by a powerful glow. The Ursa stumbled, then fell as a dark portal opened up beneath its feet. Trying to pull itself up, it clawed angrily at the stone, but its hindquarters drug it down into a black nothingness. The portal closed shut like an iris behind it. In an instant, the Ursa was defeated.
As you can see, for the most magical pony in Equestria, such a creature was hardly a challenge. And now, the feats that the great and powerful Trixie can accomplish are far beyond your imaginations, for she has had over 1,000 years to master her art,
Trixie said.
But I am afraid that your time here is done, and the great and powerful Trixie must return you back to your mundane existence.
Another flash of light, and they all stood back in front of the stage at the carnival. Trixie and Fluttershy were gone. Twilight stepped quickly up to the base of the stage to help Rainbow. She noticed distractedly that several of the wooden supports along the base of the stage languished in varying states of disrepair, including the cracked one Rainbow lay next to. Rainbow groaned and rubbed a rising welt on her face.
Ow. I don't suppose I can have one of those healing potions.
Twilight shook her head while she helped Rainbow back to her feet.
Nope.
She glanced at the bandage on her own shoulder.
Look what happened to me,
And I didn't need one.
Yeah, right, whatever.
Rainbow grunted.
Well, Trixie's powerful. And she has Fluttershy.
Rainbow removed the hoof from her face.
What in Equestria was that?
I'd rather not tangle with her, Applejack said from behind Twilight. How much of that do you reckon was true? Twilight glanced at Applejack, a frown crossing her features.
It doesn't seem possible, but I'm not sure what to believe. We saw what we saw, didn't we?
Applejack nodded. Yep. So what do we do now?
I think we should pay a visit to Madame Bedwin. Maybe she'll let us see Fluttershy and we can resolve this whole thing peacefully,
Twilight said. The air within Madame Bedwin's tent was so heavy with acrid, smoky incense that it made Twilight cough when she breathed in too deeply. Unsurprisingly, Madame Bedwin, who lay on a bed of expensive fabrics in the back of the tent on the other side of a low table, was not a pony. Small eyes and a long, elegant muzzle identified her as an Arabian horse. Her graying mane betrayed her age.
Midnight shine, right? Come here, filly,
the madam said, her voice grating and rough. Twilight stepped forward and folded her legs beneath her, laying next to the table. Soft fabrics covered the floor of the tent. She was alone. The madam had only agreed to meet with one of them.
I'm here to talk to you about Give Me Your Hoof,
the madam said, interrupting her.
I would like to know who I'm speaking to before we do business.
Twilight eyed the madam skeptically, but she set her hoof on the table. The madam closed her eyes and seized Twilight's hoof, then proceeded to probe every line in the keratin. Twilight found the sensation to be strangely relaxing. With each passing moment, though, the madam appeared to grow more and more tense, until finally her eyes shot wide open and she abruptly released Twilight's hoof. The madam gasped theatrically.
I cannot read your fate,
she said.
Your destiny and your identity are beyond my sight.
For a moment, Twilight thought the madam looked sad.
I only know that great trials await you on the road ahead.
Twilight snorted inwardly, not wanting to openly disrespect her host. Not only was the madam, as Twilight suspected, unable to predict anything specific about the future, she couldn't even tell Twilight something she wanted to hear. She made for a poor fraud. Instead of telling Twilight believable lies, she told Twilight nothing.
So, is a mystery like yourself with a fantastical creature as a companion looking for a spot at the carnival? We are always looking for new talent,
the madam said.
No, I'm not looking for a job here. My friends and I are looking for a pegasus named Fluttershy. I believe she's Trixie's assistant,
Twilight explained. Madam arched a brow.
We have a few pegasi in the circus, but none named Fluttershy. The great and powerful Trixie's assistant is an earth pony named Butterfly. Could we speak with her, just to be sure?
Twilight pleaded. The madam shook her head.
I'm sorry, I cannot allow that. We don't allow slaves to speak to customers.
Twilight blinked.
She's a slave? Yes. We purchased her legitimately, I can assure you. All of her documentation is in order,
the madam said.
Are you sure you can't make an exception?
Twilight pressed.
I cannot.
The madam's welcoming attitude turned hard.
Now, unless you have something I can help you with, I suggest you leave.
Defeated, Twilight stood up and pushed her way out the tent flap. As soon as she stepped blinking into the daylight, Rainbow launched a question at her.
Well, what did she say? She claimed there's no pegasus named Fluttershy in her troop. She said that Butterfly is an earth pony slave, and she said that we couldn't see her,
Twilight said. She turned once her hindquarters cleared the tent and started to make her way toward the edge of the carnival grounds. She took a deep breath of fresh outside air, and the others followed her, Spike hurrying along on his two legs. A thought suddenly occurred to Twilight.
Spike, get me a book with information about Ursa's, please,
she said. Coming right up, Spike said, and then produced a book. Rainbow landed in front of Twilight with a blast of air.
Where are we going? I'm not going to give up.
Twilight stopped and opened the book that Spike handed her. She flipped through the pages, ignoring Rainbow.
Ursa, Major,
she muttered.
Aha! Twilight!
Rainbow said, seeking a response.
Here we are. Wait a minute. The size is wrong,
Twilight said. Pinky stared at Twilight with wide eyes.
What do you mean? Trixie found something bigger? No.
Twilight flipped the book around so they could all see.
Smaller.
The drawing she'd seen on the page made an Ursa Major out to be astoundingly massive. It outsized the pony used for scale 100-fold at least. A fully grown dragon would be more comparable. Twilight flipped the book around again and turned the page.
Ursa Minor. Juvenile Ursa.
Twilight turned to the book so they could see again.
This is what Trixie fought. Not an Ursa Major. She may be powerful, but she is fallible.
Twilight lowered her voice before continuing.
We'll sneak into this place after dark, and we'll save Fluttershy then. If Trixie tries to stop us, we'll find a way to win.
Several hours later, Twilight found herself wondering how she could have been so monumentally stupid, so staggeringly arrogant, as to even think of confronting a spellcaster with Trixie's abilities. It had been easy enough to sneak into the tent where Twilight suspected the madam kept her slaves. It had been easier still to find the cage where Butterfly slept, along with a small white bunny curled in her hair. But while Rainbow and Applejack argued over the quietest way to get the lock open, Trixie had appeared in the doorway. Before Twilight had been able to react, a white flash of light had replaced the tent and its dozen cage-bound slaves with an exotic Arabian palace, complete with satin curtains, lush velvet rugs, and an ivory throne. At the moment, she was alone, other than Trixie sitting on the throne looking down at her with contempt. She deserved contempt. She was an arrogant young wizard trifling with magic she didn't understand.
Who dares trespass upon the glorious realm of the great and powerful Trixie?
Trixie's impressive voice echoed through the chamber. Rapidly, Twilight scrambled for an excuse that could get her and her friends out of this mess alive.
Well, speak, worm,
Trixie demanded. Quickly, Twilight threw herself to the ground, groveling before Trixie.
I'm sorry, great and powerful Trixie. I'm sorry, your great and powerfulness. I'm a young wizard, and I was so stunned by your magic that I wanted to know more. I didn't mean to intrude where I don't belong.
She looked up at Trixie nervously. Trixie nodded.
Acceptable.
Trixie motioned with a hoof, and a pony servant that Twilight hadn't seen before stepped forward and presented Trixie with a golden goblet. She took the goblet in her levitation, and the servant stepped back while she sipped it. The servant returned to a spot by the wall and stood eerily still. Twilight looked to the opposite wall and rubbed her eyes. A second servant stood there as well.
The great and powerful Trixie appreciates your interest, but she cannot tell you about her power. As you are so young, you would not even understand the sheer complexity of it.
While Trixie spoke, Twilight couldn't shake the feeling of something being terribly wrong, beyond her own stupidity. She felt the same way she had when Trixie had teleported her in the audience at the show across Equestria.
There has to be an explanation,
she thought. Trixie's next statement made Twilight cringe.
Besides, the great and powerful Trixie would never share her secrets with someone conspiring to steal her assistant.
Trixie stood up from her throne and approached Twilight with an attitude of righteous anger.
Do not look so surprised. Bedwin told her all about your conversation, Midnight Shine.
Twilight's eyes narrowed. Trixie, once again, was fallible.
Shouldn't Trixie know my real name? How could someone be so powerful and still make such simple mistakes?
She mused. As much as she and her friends tried to only use her name when other ponies weren't listening, they hadn't really been all that careful. Just like the Ursa, it would be easy enough to figure out for a normal pony. Trixie should know these details.
Now, what is the great and powerful Trixie going to do with you,
Trixie said, standing over her.
You have audacity, she'll give you that. Perhaps even a worthless individual such as you can be of some use to me.
For all that Trixie was, her powers were strangely limited. Her main trick seemed to be instant and unlimited mass teleportation. And that was when it hit her. It was a trick. It all came together. The dirt beneath her hoof, the crack when Rainbow had hit what was actually the stage support, the way the other creatures stood eerily still, why Trixie would be performing at some two-bit carnival, and the sheer impossibility of it all. She should have trusted her instincts from the beginning. She knew it was impossible. Instead, she had let Trixie's flair and attitude mislead her and distract her from the truth. And the truth was, Trixie was a fraud, and this was all an illusion. Twilight picked herself up off the floor and looked around the room. Every imperfection, every place where Trixie had failed became obvious to her. The way the curtains moved was wrong. The way the servants stood glassy-eyed at their posts was wrong. The whole place was like the way the ring had struck the stick in the booth. Wrong.
Grovel!
Trixie demanded. Twilight looked back at her. The truth gave her confidence.
This isn't real,
she said to Trixie. Twilight saw a hint of fear in Trixie's eyes, but wrath quickly replaced it.
You will find that this is very real,
Trixie threatened. The servants grew, towering until they were giants whose heads nearly brushed the ceiling. They stomped toward Twilight, and the floor cracked beneath their hooves as they advanced. The ceiling started to crumble, then the walls and even Trixie's form standing in front of her. Fear shot through her as one of the giant's massive hooves descended toward her, but she repressed her instinct to run and closed her eyes, hoping she was right. No hoof fell. When Twilight opened her eyes, she was standing back in the tent. She looked around for her friends. Rainbow Dash shivered on the floor of a cage next to the sleeping Fluttershy, her wing blades discarded on the floor outside. Pinkie Pie had tangled herself up in a pile of ropes until she could no longer move next to the edge of the tent, giggling uncontrollably. Trixie stood near the entrance of the tent, her horn aglow and her face twisted in a mixture of concentration and panic. Twilight turned around to face the sudden sound. Applejack relentlessly bucked the door of a metal cage from the inside, trapped. Her chain lay on the floor of the tent, outside the cage. The slaves, still under the effects of Trixie's magic, slept on.
Applejack?
Twilight said in wonder. Applejack stopped bucking to look at Twilight.
Tell me you ain't just talking to yourself. Tell me you figured it out.
Twilight smiled, clapping her hooves together.
Yes, it was an illusion.
She tricked me. Tricked all of us. Got me to trap myself in this cage before I figured it out. Didn't trap you, though.
Applejack flicked her head toward Trixie.
Go kick her flank.
Twilight nodded and drew Solstice. Confidently, she advanced on Trixie. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted movement. The white bunny that had been sleeping next to Fluttershy easily slipped through the bars of the cage and bounded toward her. Behind him, Fluttershy raised her head, her eyes opening. While Twilight watched the bunny, she heard the caged pony gasp in fright. The bunny paused in front of Twilight. Woody vines emerged from the dirt floor of the tent. They picked up the bunny, surrounding him and empowering him. He rose up until he was a creature of bark and wood a head taller than her, a massive wooden rabbit. Twilight eyed the tree beast skeptically, and then ignored it, not even moving Solstice to guard. Trixie's illusions couldn't actually harm her.
Really, Trixie? I already figured out your illusions. Is this really the best idea?
Applejack's voice called from behind her while she spoke. Twilight, look! The rest of Applejack's words were lost when her head snapped violently to the side. The wooden bunny's hind leg made contact with her jaw. She spun toward the ground. She remained aware of every moment of falling, but although she was aware, she couldn't consciously react. Her useless limbs flailed to even reflexively protect her from the impact when the floor came up to meet her hard. She heard Trixie's voice over the ringing in her ears.
Oh, he is very real, as you can see. And you know what the best part is? He thinks you're Trixie.
Trixie said with a cruel laugh. With a groan, Twilight gathered her barely responsive limbs beneath her. She tried to order her thoughts enough to cast a spell as she stood, But long before she could even begin, a second impact hit her side. The blow knocked her to the ground, where she lay coughing. Blood trickled out of her nose and from a reopened talon gash on her neck. Solstice lay a few hoofspans away where she had dropped it after the first kick. She reached out toward it with her magic, but the rabbit's foot came down on it as soon as her levitation field glowed around it, trapping the blade flat against the ground.
Stop it, you varmint!
Applejack bucked the cage again.
She's not who you think she is!
From Twilight's position on the ground, she saw something white past the flaps covering the entrance to the tent. A bolt of coalesced light blue magic shot from the opening and struck Trixie. She reeled, the glow around her horn dissipating. Relief filled Twilight when the rabbit, formerly looming over her, stopped abruptly and turned his bark-covered face toward Trixie with an angry glare. Rarity strode in the doorway of the tent with a beautifully crafted recurve bow floating in an aura of magic beside her. She stood over Trixie.
That's what you get for keeping slaves, hurting ponies, and giving me green hair.